The most intoxicating legend to hit the likes of Apex comes in the form of this sizable master of enclosed spaces as he lets one rip on the enemy team. Make sure to open a window because we're going through everything the gas man has to offer. So let's first talk gas. Caustic's kit utilizes Nox gas through a trap and a grenade. It's a green gas cloud where enemies within will initially take 5 damage per tick, going up by 1 damage for every 2 consecutive ticks they take until they get out of it, and the damage is dealt directly to your health, bypassing any amount of armor they may currently have. However, on downed enemies, the damage taken is always a flat 5 HP per tick. Additionally, enemies inside the gas will be slowed and unable to sprint. However, teammates will be unaffected by this, and the gas man himself is immune to his and any enemy caustic gas he comes across too. His passive grants vision similar to the digital threat optics for enemies within his gas, highlighting them in this thicker shade of green as long as they're also within line of sight. Next is his tactical in the form of these gas traps. These are canisters that by holding down the tactical button and releasing it can be thrown out to a position where it will stay indefinitely unless removed or triggered. These traps can be triggered by nearby enemy movement or activated by enemy or ally gunshot. This will release a cloud of gas in the area for up to 13 seconds. That's 11 seconds once triggered, with 2 extra lingering seconds as unwanted gas often does. The traps have 150 HP each, and he may have up to 6 canisters up at any one point in time. Placing a 7th will cause it to replace the first one. Caustic can hold up to 3 charges at a time, and each charge has a 20-second cooldown. His ultimate is also a deadly gas spreader, by lobbing a gas grenade to a location indicated by this trajectory line, blanketing the area with a gas cloud for 15 seconds. This functions the same as his tactical, but covers a much larger area on a 3-minute cooldown. So in addition to these abilities, as Caustic has one of the larger hitboxes in the game, he gains the Fortified perk, which reduces all incoming damage to him by 15% except for headshots, and he can't be slowed by bullets. He also belongs to the Controller class, which allows him to interact with any of these ring consoles found at randomized locations around the map to identify the position of the next ring. This interaction with the ring console takes 7 seconds and can only be used once per round. And finally, it might be worth noting that his running animation might make his movement look and feel sluggish for some, as his strides are longer and slower. However, this is just an animation and all legends have the same base movement speed. So that's the overview, but now we get into the useful details about his kit, how best to use him, and then how to play against the gas man himself. Firstly, stacking different sources of gas does improve the damage, but only slightly. The slow will remain the same, however, instead any additional sources of gas past the first one will only damage enemies for an additional 1 HP per tick. The gas itself will block Lifeline's drone healing capabilities while inside and will damage most legend abilities, things like Crypto's drone, Rampart's barriers, and Watson's ult. A few key things to note with Caustic's passive is firstly that the vision gain doesn't carry over to your teammates, so you'll need to be communicating all the information you have on their locations and status through comms. Bear in mind that the vision granted by being in his gas isn't blocked by Bangalore smoke grenades, so it's a useful tool to take advantage of when fighting against a Bangalore or even with her on your team. Remember that enemy caustics are immune to the effects of gas, and therefore aren't highlighted due to your passive. This might cause confusion when you're on the lookout for hit markers by enemies caught in your gas in an enclosed space, only to find an immune caustic in the corner ready to have you. There is plenty of nuance when it comes to using caustic traps, which are the bread and butter of his kit. The trap, when thrown, has an arming time of around 3 seconds from when it hits the ground. During this time, it's immune to any damage and can't be triggered. Once armed, if a friendly or enemy bullet hits this base area, the trap will disappear, but if any other part is hit, then it becomes activated. There are a number of things to think about when it comes to trap placement so they aren't avoided or easily shot down. Now, the obvious one is being sure to place them behind cover whenever you can. This will protect it from gunfire as well as make it more likely to be triggered by passing enemies. While defending a building, traps can be used to block doors or trigger upon enemy entry. A few things to consider here is if you put a trap too close to a door, due to object clipping, it's possible for it to be triggered from the other side, so placing it a little further back is advised. Next is to block the side of the door that opens out. This gives you and your team access in and out as long as you don't close the door behind you when you're outside, as it only blocks the door from that direction. When placing it at entry points with the intention for enemies to activate them, make sure to position the trap again on the side that the door opens, as there are some angles on the other side where the door will block the trap from being activated due to line of sight. When your network of traps starts springing into action, you can see which ones are triggered through the walls as well as any hit markers on enemies, giving you awareness of their positioning. And if you find yourself prepping an area only for the team to move on, picking your traps back up will recover a charge. In general, you don't want to be holding full charges most of the time, so just throw one out to get the next charge cooldown ticking. Not only might it be helpful if an unsuspecting enemy triggers it, but it helps generate a surplus of charges that you can then recover if a fight occurs nearby. Thinking outside the box a little, you can think about using the traps as a sort of smoke screen, setting them off yourself for example to provide cover for a res or to heal. The additional benefit is the physical object itself is large enough to provide good temporary cover to even the larger hitbox characters if required, absorbing up to 150 HP. When dropping from height, placing a trap at your landing spot will allow you to bypass the landing stun you normally receive from falling for some additional mobility, similarly to Horizon's passive. And finally, traps can be placed underneath you, keeping it uninflated until you move off it. In the past, this was the subject of an exploit that made Caustic unkillable when standing on top. I couldn't think of any reasonable use for it currently, so maybe you can let me know below. Caustic's ultimate has the benefit of lasting its full duration every time, as it isn't linked to a canister that can be destroyed prematurely. I think it's important to view his ult as a disruptive tool rather than one that will down full teams of enemies. Although the damage can add up, players will prioritize leaving the gas, and it's this aspect you should use to your advantage. It's less useful when used out in an open area due to players being able to rotate around it. However, lobbing it at enemies behind cover will force them out into the open or give you ample opportunity to advance on them. Using your passive improves sight on enemies inside as well as its slow effect to empty a full mag into them. Other options would be to save your throwables for these times to take advantage of them being slowed. Using it indoors or in closed spaces is its primary strength, either cutting off pathways or lowering their responsiveness and health during a gunfight. It's also useful to break off choke points from teams outside of the circle, as the direct HP damage will stack with the circle damage effectively. Caustic becomes more and more effective as the game progresses due to the shrinking size of the map. Having his ultimate ready in the late game would play into his advantage even further, particularly in the likes of the final circle, where the remaining teams are likely to be fighting over one enclosed space. So consider holding your ult or an accelerant if this type of situation arises. Okay, so that's all the details one might want to know about Caustic's individual abilities and passive bonuses. Now let's talk about how to play as Caustic in-game. By default, you'll want to consider placing traps in positions that enemies breach quickly, so the ends of zip lines, wraith portals and gravity cannons, as it creates a surefire way to catch them in a vulnerable position. Outside of that, entryways like doors, around corners or behind cover should be what you're looking for at all times when rotating. Having your traps in position beforehand is the key to making the most of it. It not only ensures that you have the upper hand at the start of a fight, but gives you options to fall back and avoid being chased when you're low. It might make sense to feel like you need to trigger all your traps yourself to ensure they aren't shot and disarmed. However, if they're well placed, consider that activating them yourself will discourage them from entering, removing the opportunity for them to trigger it themselves and get caught out of position. However, even at times when in enclosed areas and the enemy is already gassed up, you can trap during the gunfight too to keep the pressure up or discourage enemies to rotate in a certain way. Now, there are a number of things you can consider when playing against a Caustic. First is that he is his own worst enemy. Picking Caustic, as I've mentioned, will make you immune to the effects of enemy Caustics. However, your gas will also not work on them. His abilities have a few interesting interactions with other legend abilities too, like Gibraltar Bubble blocking gas as long as the source of the gas is on the opposite side. And Watson's ult can completely destroy Caustic's tactical and ult if it's thrown within range, negating its effects entirely. If not triggered, a crypto ult will disarm all traps in range and will otherwise deal damage to those already triggered. And my favourite is Mirage can spring traps with his decoy to reveal Caustic's current location to him. For Legend Viability, there's a number of interesting combos and synergies that I'll mention, although any team can make good use of Caustic's kit. First, Bangalore makes a good partner as she can smoke areas which Caustic can then cover with gas. It will give Caustic a huge advantage, particularly if no one in the fight has digital sights. As he combos grenades well with enemies caught in his traps, legends like Fuse and Horizon can be taken advantage of as part of a coordinated attempt to wipe squads that get caught out. If you prefer the hunker down playstyle, rotating inside the circle early and pitching a tent inside an enclosed space, then think about bringing Watson or Loba to set additional traps and pull loot into your location. And finally, Wraith synergizes well with Caustic in a few ways. First, her ult, allowing her to reposition the team to a new spot, brings much needed team mobility, and also because Caustic's traps allow safe passage through her ult, as anyone that follows will be extremely vulnerable to getting caught. Other than just your preferred loadout, you might want to consider the strengths of a mid-range burst weapon with Caustic to beam down those caught in gas, as they'll be moving slowly and highlighted to you. And based on the environments, you're most likely to be fighting in close quarters, so a close range weapon would be ideal too. Once you've got used to all the core strengths of Caustic and can play him comfortably in ranked, I suggest you look at some of the higher level players who use him often. The most notable one for me has been Giggle Autumn, a fantastically dedicated Caustic main who's the #1 Caustic player and has a whole load of videos that show off high level mechanics far beyond the scope of this video, which is more to get you completely clued up on this legend from scratch, so check her out below if you wish. But before you head over there, if you liked the video and want to see more in the future, please do me a favour and like, subscribe and even comment so you can help the channel grow, and catch me on the next one. Caustic is a defensive legend who can also be used to play a pretty aggressive game. He can satisfyingly squeeze every ounce of life from his enemies and can control the flow of a gunfight well if played right. But remember, we play for fun, so if it stresses you too much, cool off, touch grass, and when you do play, play to win.